Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Recover You. I'm here today with a special guest and friend, Carly. Welcome, welcome. So glad to have you today. I am very excited to have Carly on. We are going to talk about a really, to me, interesting topic about children and families that have been divorced and just some thoughts around that topic. I know it is a very... it's a hot topic. A lot of people have a lot of fears around this. A lot of people have a lot of worries around getting divorced if they have children. And so we're just going to kind of talk through some of these things. But one of the things I want to start with in introducing this concept is that we are in no way, shape, or form wanting to tell you what to do with your decision making. And we don't want to tell you how to think or what to feel. But one of the things I do know is when we experience pain and when we are in these high stress situations, our brain tends to highlight worst case scenario. It doesn't always bring up all of the options that we have in life. It generally highlights whatever is fear-based, whatever is like the scariest scenario, whatever is the worst scenario. And within this topic of getting divorced and having kids, we've also been taught a lot of things around that it's always a bad situation, that it's like really bad for the kids. Like there's not a healthy option when it comes to this. And so we just want to maybe talk about some alternative perspectives. Again, when we're coming from a place of pain, a lot of times, or we've been taught certain things, it's hard to think about other options. And so the pattern that our brain can have can be very single focused and very focused on one outcome. And so we're just going to kind of talk about this and hopefully maybe bring up some things to think about or to consider. But again, there's no judgment. I know there's like a million different scenarios. And so there's no way we're going to be able to cover all of them today, but that's sort of what we're going to talk about. So let me introduce Carly. Carly is a personal power coach, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and NLP trained master life coach with a passion for transformation. She advocates that individuals and practitioners become more trauma informed when working through healing modalities. With a deep understanding of the gut-brain connection and the subconscious mind, she makes next level transformation fun, expansive, and wildly empowering. Welcome, Carly. And she's my friend.
Yay.
Yes, and we're friends. And you were on the podcast, I think it was season 1, when we were talking about human design. So it's been a little bit of time, but welcome back. So glad to have you.
Thanks.
So I thought this actually came up totally randomly, like a few weeks ago, I think it was, or maybe even a month ago now. We were connecting for a totally different reason, and we ended up talking about this topic, and you said some things about your personal experience that was really interesting to me, and I thought that's a really different perspective. And you also come with a perspective as a teacher and an educator, having worked with young children and having seen a lot of I'm sure, a variety of family situations. And so you're going to kind of bring that into this conversation as well. So welcome, and maybe share a little bit about who you are and, how this is a topic that you can speak on. What's your story?
Yeah. I'm Carly, as Kylene said. And I started off in like the adult world as a teacher. I have a master's of science in education, and I was a pretty highly qualified educator for a little over 12 years in teaching. And then just my personal life story shifted me out of teaching. And then I became a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, which ironically that started because I was actually your Kylene's client. And it just changed so much about the way that I saw myself and healing. And then I also became a life coach because Kylene was my coach, and I was introduced to that modality and realized the two really have to go together. And then through my own work, both as a client and as a coach, and what I was bringing to the world from a personal experience level, I just started to become really, really knowledgeable. A part of this is from my experience as a teacher and what I learned in graduate school and ongoing coursework, but just how important it is to bring trauma-informed lens to spaces. And you never know what somebody's going through. Almost everybody that you're talking to has some form of traumatization in their past. And so that became like a huge focus of my growth and development over the past 3 years as well.
Yeah, I know you really, we followed similar trajectories, a little bit different times, but I love it. And the reason I think it's actually like an example of when you experience something in life that is transformational, you really like take it and run with it, you know, and you want to help other people. And I think that was both of our journeys in a lot of ways. So tell us a little bit about your personal experience being a child of divorce, and just that your parents did stay together until you were out of high school, or?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because like as a kid, you don't really kind of consciously have awareness about all the nitty gritty details. But then as an adult, as you're sort of starting to like reflect back and start to understand how you became the person that you became and the decisions in life and just the way you think about the world. And then also, especially through teaching and watching so many hundreds of students, you know, pass through. So you just start to like really realize things that affected you. So when I think back to like my childhood and like my parents' relationship, like they were happily married for the bulk of like my childhood. I would say it was probably around middle school where, again, like kind of out of my awareness, but when you like look back at it, that's probably when things just started to get like there was tension in the house and something just like shifted. I had a family member in my immediate family who was like dealing with like pretty significant mental health issues. And then, you know, that kind of dominoes out to other family members as well. And with that, like my dad, the company that he had worked for, like filed for bankruptcy. So he was like out of a job at that point. So then there was financial burdens that were hitting my family. And so I remember being privy to like certain conversations around like, you know, just kind of like not asking for too much in terms of like being a little bit more cautious of money. And, you know, you're witnessing family members who are going through mental health issues. You don't necessarily have like the names and the labels for it, but it's happening like within the sphere of influence. And it's just funny. I have a really vivid memory actually in middle school of like I have two brothers. So I remember in middle school talking to somebody and being like, I always want a sister. I was like, but the only way for me to get one is for my parents to divorce and one of them to like remarry and then to have a baby or like, you know, like a stepdaughter. And I was like, that's not going to happen. I don't know why I remember that conversation so well, probably because like what I didn't know at the time was like things were already kind of starting to get a little rough for my parents and their relationship. And maybe I was subconsciously like picking up on that. At some point in high school, my parents started to separate. And I'd say it was probably around, it's a little blurry, but it was probably around like junior year of high school. My dad like moved his stuff down into our basement. So he was like living in our house, but like the basement wasn't like an apartment. It was just, he had an office space down there at one point. He was working from home after that original job that was an office job fell through. He was doing a lot of like entrepreneurial kind of like little side hustle type jobs and had a business of his own at one point. And then he was like living down there on like, there was like a mattress down there. I don't think there was ever actually like a bed frame. I think it was like a mattress on the floor down there. And then at some point, I think I was in college by the time they officially got divorced. But that whole time period is like a little blurry only because again, it's like you consciously know, like my dad is sleeping like they're not sleeping in the same space, but he's living in my house, but he's still a part of my life, and I don't know. So that it's like a little blurry, but that was my experience for the most part with being a child, and it's weird too because at the time, I think for some reason I just had it in my mind that like your parents get divorced when you're a kid and like a little kid, and if you manage to like to get out of like elementary school and your parents are still married, like they're not going to get divorced. Like that's like a thing that happens to little kids, I guess, because I was a little kid when that was happening to some of my friends. I remember my first friend who told me that her parents were getting divorced And I didn't even know what that meant at the time. It's like, so it stands out too. Like that concept, I was like, wait, what? That can happen?
Yeah.
But,
Did your parents have any conversation that you recall with you about like the context of what was happening or?
It's so interesting because this like hasn't really come up in my processing. Like when I've spent the last 3 years sort of like unpacking and, doing a lot of deep inner work and healing work. And there hasn't ever been, just like memories that have really, really floated to the surface around this topic. I definitely remember like the concept of them like separating and daddy moving into the basement. And like, I think it was a very different experience than a lot of other kids maybe go through, like there wasn't infidelity in the marriage. There wasn't like a falling out of love type of thing. It was things just weren't working as a family unit anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know at what point that became part of my awareness. I know a lot of it had to do with like the financial burden and them kind of just like their values on how to make that work as a family unit just wasn't lining up with each other anymore. And so that's pretty much like as far as I understood it at that point, like that they're not out of like, they didn't fall out of love with each other. It wasn't working to stay married anymore. So I mean, it's like kind of confusing because it was like clean in a sense. Like it was like,
well, it sounds like if there was a conversation, it was primarily around the separation, just like factual sort of information, and not that it was like this ongoing conversation necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't. It's like I just remember I was very social. Like I'd go to the mall with my friends after school and to a friend's house and be watching. I wasn't in the home like that much, I don't think. And if I did, I was like on my own. Like I'd come home and like watch TV, or at that time, like AOL and like was big. So I'd be on AOL and things like
I am your friends.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's how I learned how to type on AIM. That's basically how I learned how to type fast.
We had actual typing classes in elementary school with QWERTY.
Nice. QWERTY, yeah. So how did it feel to you when your parents did get divorced and at that point you were an adult?
Okay, so I remember when my dad actually moved out, and then there's this like weird, almost like I don't, at the time, I don't know if I would have been able to label these like emotions and the way that I was feeling, but like looking back on it, I definitely felt somewhat like it was a burden, right? Like I now had to make plans to see my dad. Like it wasn't like he was just at the house and like I can just hang out and like, see them in passing. So, and I was like old enough that I was driving. So then it like kind of fell to me to, and it's not that I didn't want to see him, but it's weird to like have to kind of designate a weekend or like a day to make it very intentional to go over. And as like a teenager, like that wasn't necessarily my number one priority at the time. And I remember feeling very guilty about that. But we always had fun.
Yeah. Tell me about the guilt. Where did that come in?
I felt guilty that wasn't like the thing that I wanted to do. And then I didn't want to voice
You just sort of wanted to live your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you felt like pressure internally, or do you think that was ever put on you in any way?
No, I think I do a very good job of putting it up on myself. So I don't know. Do we learn to put it on ourselves because of outside it? I couldn't really answer that question other than like, he's your father. You should want to go see him. Maybe. Yeah. I could see that having said to me.
Yeah. I think the thing there's no right or wrong here, and there's no perfect way to do this, right? I think people navigate this in so many different ways. So what you just described is like an in-home separation, which a lot of people do for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's financial. Sometimes it's because they're seeing if reconciliation is possible and they can live separately in the same home and see if that's an option for them. Sometimes they move towards divorce. So there's so many different ways that people can choose to navigate this. And it sounds like yours chose in-home separation up until a point. What do you think looking back? Because I think you made a comment to me at one point that was it was interesting around your perspective of them choosing to stay together, and your perspective has been that they did that for the kids. So how did you feel about that sort of thinking about it that way and looking back at it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of just like so much that I've been exposed to between friends who have young kids and their relationship is not in the best space. And then again, with teaching and having conferences with parents, and then also my own experiences, like that's just such a common thread of like, well, we're doing it for the kids, or like, we're going to stay together until the kids are in college. And I don't know, to me, that sort of just feels like you're putting so much of the responsibility of your relationship on your children. And like, it kind of feels like, well, now you're building like this lie around the relationship, because if you're staying together for the children, then you're staying together when you really maybe shouldn't be, or like you're just creating, it's like a performance almost at that point of pretending that things are fine when they're not fine, or I don't understand how you could do that and then like not have resentment in a household, because if you're doing it for the kids, one, like, are you not now saying that there's resentment towards your own children? Like, and you're just like, that's not, I don't know, to me, that's not fair to put on your children. Like if you don't want to be together, don't be together.
That's interesting because did you ever feel any of that from your parents? Do you think that there was some resentment, or did you feel any negative emotions that they did wait to get divorced? Whether it was directly communicated to you or not.
Felt like it happened sort of fast, because I do think that, again, it was like kind of unique because like it wasn't like somebody cheated on like the other one, or it wasn't like this falling out of love. It was just like the type of love changed, I think, is like really what happened. So I think when my dad was like living in the basement and things like that, it was kind of confusing on me. And then once I was older and they got divorced and he moved out, I do look back and I'm kind of do like wonder. And it's not always the healthiest thing to do this, because things were the way that they were. But there's the human part of my brain that does look back and wonders like, well, if at the point of time that they knew that it wasn't going to work out, had they done it sooner, like, would there have been less tension in the house? Would there have been less resentment in the house?
So you were feeling some of those negative emotions through that period.
Oh yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Were there like a lot of disagreements?
I think that, they were doing it amicably and with the best intentions of, let's support my dad in like getting to a financial place where economically it made sense for him to be able to move out of the house. I believe he had to buy my mom out of a portion of the house as well. So like she was doing it from a loving place. Like she could have kicked him out of the house or vice versa. And that didn't happen. So on one hand, you have this like very nice, that's like sweet, that's loving, that's kind. But then on the other hand, it's kind of like, okay, but having one parent live in the basement, which it seems kind of like weird to begin with. And like, whose house is it? Like, who do I go to? It definitely created this weird dynamic.
From your child perspective, because you were talking about, okay, so once they get divorced, it's still uncomfortable because now you have different home locations, right? Do you think them staying in the same house, like for you as a kid, do you think that was beneficial for you to not have to think about that, like in high school, for example?
If you asked me at the time, I would probably say yes, because there was always, there was two parents around and my dad would pick us up from high school, often unless we were like walking or something. But he usually, from the time I was in middle school, he became the parent that his hours were more conducive to. He did the food shopping. He picked us up from high school, even middle school. I remember he used to like go, like literally, we were all such picky eaters, and we each, at the time I ate fast food. And like I wanted Wendy's and my older brother wanted Burger King and my other brother wanted McDonald's. And he like literally would go to all three of them to like get us dinner. So in some ways it was better because there was a parent at home. My mom was a teacher, but she worked late hours, partially because of driving distance. I think at some point she became part of the administration. So I don't know at what point that pivoted. I don't know what part of her was staying at work later because she didn't want to be at home, maybe. Who knows? But so in that aspect, it was supportive and nice. And then there's also like the part of me that like as an adult, I look back and I'm just kind of like, how much of that was real, like how much of that. So I don't know. It's kind of, again, it's like the both and it's like, right. And that's probably what I was feeling at the time. Because even as an adult, when I think back to it, it's like pulling me in multiple directions. So if an adult perspective, I'm looking back and that's pulling me in directions I can only imagine as a kid, even if I wasn't consciously aware of it, of what it was doing.
Well, that's really interesting because you've just mentioned two things that align with like addiction and betrayal and reconciliation and recovery that we talk about a lot. And that's honesty and the sense of reality. And so I kind of want to talk about that just really briefly because that's a totally different perspective, I think, on kids navigating this and families navigating this that we have to, like, I think we should talk about it because you just brought it up. And so when we talk about couples navigating betrayal and reconciliation, basically, honesty has to be the foundational core of it. We can't move past what has happened, or we can't move through what has happened and create something good without laying a really strong honesty or foundation of honesty. But the reason that that's so hard is because betrayal has taken your sense of reality away. And so you're living this life where you think, you know, red is red and blue is blue and up is up and down is down. And then all of a sudden it's not. So what you just described is, I just thought that was really interesting because those two components still came into your life of like your reality sort of being challenged and trying to make sense of like what was real and what was true because you viewed it as, and correct me if I'm interpreting this wrong, but you were viewing it as them sort of not living honestly, not living authentically. And so that brought confusion to you and your interpretation of what was happening.
And actually hearing you say it that way is really interesting because like right at the beginning, I was saying it wasn't like where there was infidelity in the marriage, but hearing you kind of mirror and parrot it back in that way with the clarity, it's like, what does that, like infidelity in terms of like cheating with another person didn't exist, but the betrayal over like the confusion over a marriage that was built on like a certain foundation, all of a sudden that foundation is pulled out from like under you. That part is still very real to, I believe, both of my parents for different reasons. And so the concept of them probably feeling betrayed within it, you know, the person who initiated the separation, you know, on the other person, I don't feel comfortable naming like too many, like that specific of a detail, but like one that was very clear who of my parents sort of initiated the separation on the other parent. So that parent was sort of like, that was unexpected. But then the parent that, you know, the reason why it was brought upon them is because they weren't like quote unquote, like holding up like their end of the bargain or like the expectation of what the marriage was going to be or like the support or providing for the family was going to look like. And then there was mental illness like happening too, which is always a strange, you know, thing to throw in because it's so invisible. And so it's like, I mean, you don't really know the significance of the impact of the illness on the person. And I think that when it's like a visible illness, I know that you had cancer. It always feels weird to like bring it up, but like when somebody is going through cancer and like chemotherapy and you're physically like you're seeing their hair falling out and, you know, usually they either get very bloated from like steroids or very skinny from like loss of appetite. You're seeing it. And there's just a different level of like empathy and sympathy and expectation of, or lack of expectation in terms of what you're actually expecting the person to be capable of being able to do. And I do know that they were seeking lots of resourcing. Like my whole family, you know, we don't hide. Like I've always been exposed to my parents and family members having like psychiatrists or psychologists or mental health providers and medications and things like that has always been a part of my experience. So it's just, I don't even know where I started this topic. It's part of the conversation, but with the betrayal part. So again, it's like, yeah, because like it's reality and it's not reality. Like it's both are happening at the same time. So the things that don't feel real can be real. And the things that don't feel, you know, it is very confusing. So it's interesting to hear you labeling it as like the betrayal. And then like the honesty part, I think because they're both walking through it and it's so confusing for them and they're going through, you know, I'm probably like was mirroring almost the nervous system reactions that they were feeling at that time. they're also walking that walk of like, they don't know what is reality and if they're going to work it out and if there's going to be reconciliation and what the future holds. So having those conversations with your kids, it's like the conversations can only happen at a level of awareness that the people holding the conversation have the awareness to have it at.
Right. And I think this is like a good moment to say that there are so many ways that this can go for any individual family, and there's really no perfect way that it can go.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it's really important to say, while we're talking about this, that a two-parent home doesn't automatically equal healthy patterns either. So,
Correct.
Patrick and I talk about how, none of us have perfect family systems. Like, we all have our stuff, right? And so when we're talking about this, it comes with complication. But I think it's really interesting that some of the complications that you've brought up are similar to the things that we're already dealing with betrayal. And also when you zoom out, that just reminds me that really anything that we're working through is navigating the same human patterns. It's navigating the same wounding, the same emotions, the same fears, the same insecurities. It's just maybe a slightly different situation. And so I find that like when we're thinking about healing as humans, and we look at any individual situation, addiction, betrayal, divorce, parenting, whatever it is, we tend to find very similar patterns. And so I think that's just a really interesting. But when we're thinking about, family systems, they're never going to be perfect. None of us are perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. So when I'm thinking about this concept of families and children and divorce and staying together or getting divorced, again, there's no right or wrong. There's no perfect decision that's right for everybody. The thing that comes to my mind is, what scenario in your particular situation, you being the grand you of the world, in any situation, what is the option that may bring the most potential for health? And so for some people, I think there are situations where staying together can be that, right? Some people can co-parent really well together. Some people can get along as friends really, really well together, and they can provide like a really healthy scenario. For other people, I think it's very true that separating can provide patterns of health for the children in a more profound way than staying together could, because we sort of have this concept that like, well, it will just be better if it's two people in the same house parenting. But in some situation, that may not be the truth. It may be better if one person is able to live on their own and work on their healing and actually demonstrate health and growth and all these things to their kids in a way where the kids can actually see that really clearly demonstrated, and they can feel that. Because some of the things that you were mentioning even alluded to the idea that your nervous system was kind of picking up on things while the deeper conversations weren't necessarily being had family member to family member. I think as humans, that's what we do, right? Like our nervous system listens and responds to other nervous systems. And so when we're thinking through, okay, in my personal situation, if I'm facing this as a choice, one thing to maybe think about is, what are the potential outcomes that will lead me towards the most health that I can then demonstrate and pass on to my kids?
Yeah, I also think, I was in high school, like in the very late 90s, early 2000s. And so much of the research of like how the brain develops and childhood development, like hadn't caught up to the 3D reality. And so, it was kind of like an era of like kids are to be seen and not heard. And that's not necessarily how I was raised, but, we did have a lot of good family conversations, but also it was like children aren't a part of the decision making, right? Like this is an adult conversation. This is an adult topic. And, more and more what research really is leaning towards is like kids, they're not adults, obviously, like they're being raised, they're children, and like they are way more capable, and it's more healthy to include them in choice making and having a voice and, holding space for their emotional experience. We often, I think I was raised in a way that sometimes our emotional experiences were being protected to a point where it's like we weren't even aware that, somebody was upset, or that, like, when my parents finally did get a divorce, like, I do remember, there was a whole grieving process that my mom was going through, and she was emotionally unavailable to me. And that was very confusing. And like, I didn't have the languaging or the resourcing or the capacity to have a conversation with her about that. And that was very hard for me. Like, I was in college at that point in time. And then the stories that I spin, on that is like, well, I'm in college now. Like, I shouldn't need mommy. And it's like, in my mind, like, I needed to give her space. That was her process that she was going through. And I kind of just forgot that, like, no, I'm also going through something right now. Like, that never kind of really crossed my mind. And I was also out of the house for a lot of that because I was away. I stayed in dorms, like in sorority houses at college. So I just, like, similar to what you're saying, the kids pick up on the emotion in the household, and we learn. That's our exposure to life. That's our conditioning. That's our role modeling. And so whether the conversation's being had or not, there's something happening subconsciously on a nervous system level. So it's interesting to, like, look back and realize, like, some of those patterns are still how I kind of handle situations now.
Normal, right? Like, that's how we learn. Yeah. And then we pick up on things, and then we absorb them, and we just sort of assume, well, it's like, that's what my parents did, or that's how I learned to navigate the world. And yeah, it is really interesting, because then as adults, we sort of have this opportunity to go, do I like the way I'm interacting with the world? Which is a lot of the work that you and I have gotten to do over the past so many years, individually and some together, right? Of like, how is this now showing up in my life? And then how do I want to handle that? Is it fine to keep? Do I want to change it? What does that look like? That sort of thing. This is such a complicated topic, right? Because if you think about it, there are so many nervous systems involved, and all of them come with their own baggage. All of them come with their own pain. All of them come with their own perspectives on what's going to be, quote unquote, right or not right. But I think when, we brought up honesty earlier, right? What I've kind of heard through some of your story and some of your perspective is what may have been helpful, and I would just a blanket statement, I think in all cases would be helpful, is that when we can speak to each other and to our kids, like through as much as we can through the whole parenting relationship, but whenever we learn it, right? Because I've talked openly about the fact that I didn't learn a lot of this stuff until Keegan was older. And I wish that I had learned it 10 years prior, but I didn't, right? And so we started integrating this when he was like 16 plus, right? So you do it when you can do it. And there's no shame with that. We learn what we learn when we learn it. But the more that we can communicate openly and honestly in an age-appropriate way, depending on where your kids are, and then from a place of authenticity, I think that is going to ultimately be the best thing that we can do, regardless of what direction that decision-making process is going, right? So in a situation where you have kids that are younger and you're beginning to practice this language, it sounds like some of what you just said would have been helpful, right? Like, to have these words. And I think that too, there's a lot of things where I would have loved to have the words to share what I was experiencing with my parents, but I just didn't, right? And that's okay. That's just part of the way that we were raised, and the things that, again, our parents did the best with the information that they had, and we're doing the best with the information we have, right? But once we learn, and that's why we talk about these things openly and have these kind of podcast episodes and talk about the subconscious and talk about healing, is because at whatever point in life that we're exposed to these tools and resources, the more that, and if we have kids, but this is really can apply to any relationship, right? When we can begin using emotional language, communicating how we're feeling, understanding that there are needs, right? Like when you were in school, you were like, your body and your nervous system was basically saying, like, I need nurture, and I need nurture from a parental figure. And then your logic mind came in going with a story, right? Saying, I'm an adult. Adults don't need parents, right? And it's like, no, we all need our mommy, like.
My mommy needed her mommy at that time.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Didn't have her, unfortunately, but yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's, like even like way back at the beginning of the episode when I was talking about even just opening up this topic is I think though we have to become aware of the stories that we're telling ourselves or the stories that we've been told, right? So what stories have we been told about marriage? What stories have we been told about two-parent homes? What stories have we been told about divorce? What have we absorbed around all of these? What's true? What's not true? What's reality? What's not reality, right? And I think also within that is this idea that bad things happen in life, and there's no way that we can avoid bad things happening in life. And so whether or not someone chooses to stay together or chooses to separate, if someone separates, of course that's going to be difficult on them, on both of the individuals and on the kids. We're never going to sugarcoat that. It's a very difficult process. And a little bit about, I think what you were hinting at earlier was this idea of life happening, and the more we can have the language to navigate it, and the more we can have communication with those in our family system and our social network to navigate it and communicate about those feelings, even if it's a hard situation, it's going to be easier, and we're going to navigate it in a more healthy way. Did I say that right?
Yeah, and as a parent and a spouse, it's also super important that we, and friends, right, that we learn how to be able to hold space to receive that communication, right? Especially when parents are in a marriage where they're considering divorce, there's a lot of emotions, a lot of centering around the parents and getting divorced and what the reasons for getting the divorce. And there needs to be resourcing made available that if your child needs a safe space to be able to lash out and have an emotional reaction and opinions about that there's resourcing that's going to allow them to be able to do that. And that you as a parent can sit with that and hold the space and center that space on the child and not on what it's bringing up for you as the parent.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we tried so hard when we were navigating this. So bringing Keegan and, making sure that he was cared for. But then also it was very much about my trauma and the emotions I was going through at the time. When he did lash out there, I remember a particular situation where he was very upset and I was like, you don't get to be mad at me. Probably wasn't the best way to handle it, but also I was frustrated. But ultimately what we did try to do was really have more conversations with him and keep him updated on what was happening, and then also bring in connecting him to a therapist as well. So we had an outlet that wasn't just us. So we were trying and that's the thing too, is nobody's going to navigate this perfectly, whether you're reconciling and supporting the kids through that, because that's what I want to mention that too, because we're talking about divorce a lot, but also your kids are going to know that something's going on, even if you're opening the door to reconciliation. But if you're going through betrayal, you're going through discovery, and you have kids, that's still a very tumultuous time in your house because your emotions are very tumultuous. And so it's incredibly stressful. And again, they're going to pick up on your nervous system, even if you're not publicly having these conversations or discussions with your spouse in front of them. They're going to know that something's off because they're very intuitive. And if you think about when maybe this isn't the best example, but when a zebra is born and then it imprints it's able to tell its mother by her stripes because it within, I don't know, it's a very short period of time. It's basically born, it sees its mother, and then it absorbs that information, and that's its mother. It's that's what we do in a household. We're always absorbing the information, particularly through those developmental years of facial expressions and the nervous system and the energy with which. I
was just going to say the energy. I think people don't realize that emotions, it's energy in motion. That's it's you can feel it in the when you walk into a room and you're I can tell everyone was just talking about me. That's the energy of the emotion of the room.
Right. And when we say that, I don't want to make people feel guilty, because one of the things that I'm constantly encouraging betrayed partners is you're allowed to feel your emotions. You're allowed to feel the full spectrum of your emotions. It's actually very important. But what we can do is teach our kids that that's okay, and bring them into the conversation and teach them about their emotions. And so I think the point is we don't want to be afraid of that. We don't want to be afraid of it. We don't want to make our kids afraid of it. We don't want it to be this idea that we're never allowed to feel emotions and you're not allowed to feel feel emotions and we're never allowed to talk about emotions, because that's not real. I mean, we all have them.
When validating, right? Validating the emotion. So if like the kid is like, I'm really angry.
Right.
Like, it's okay to be like, you're allowed to feel angry right now. Like, right. I feel angry too right now. Why don't you tell me more? What is it that you feel angry about? Like, what would you like to do about that?
I should have had Carly in my ear that day that I got really frustrated.
Well, and that's another really, really important point to make, is that we, like you had said, like, we're not going to be perfect, and expecting ourselves to be perfect, honestly, ends up creating sometimes like bigger issues of like, than allowing ourselves to mess up. And the important part is in the reflection process, right? So, you know, in the moments when you said the thing that you wished you hadn't said to your child or your spouse or your friend or whoever it is in your life, and, you know, you're like laying in bed at night and you're like, oh, I could have done better. It's amazing for you then to come back in the next day or a few days later and say, like, I'm going to say, hey, Keegan, just because that was the example you brought, like, hey, Keegan, I really didn't like the way I handled myself in that situation. Like, what did it bring up for you? Like, can I have a do-over? Or like, let's try that conversation again, you know? And that is actually one of the most important parts to having a healthy relationship is the repair process. And vulnerability takes a lot of courage and bravery. And it's just, without that repair, we can't really have an honest and a relationship with integrity. And if it's a healthy relationship and a relationship that's built on a healthy foundation, it is having those ruptures and with the repair process that usually helps to make the relationship stronger. I remember when we had our first one, like, it felt so big in the moment, but because we had such a strong foundation, like, I was the one who like kept being like, I know I'm being needy, but can you just tell me like everything's going to be okay? Like, I just need to know everything's going to be okay. And like, you know, like, and you were on the other side also saying like, I know I could have said that better. And like, that just allowed me to feel more safe in the relationship and know like, okay, we both know, like, I just need my time to process whatever we were going through. And that like, we both were making sure that the other one knew, like, this is going to be okay. Like, we're going to figure, like, this is going to be fine. It's just like, let's go through the process of figuring out the process. Yeah. So even from like a trauma-informed lens, I remember when I found out and was given the name like rupture and repair, it just completely helped me to understand certain aspects and elements that were missing in previous relationships that I had with friends and bosses and things like that, is that they were not offering the repair. And when nobody offers that repair to you, you don't get it modeled for you. So you don't know how to offer it to somebody else either. And, or you end up being the like scapegoat person who just, you know, like the anxious attachment person who constantly is seeking repair when you didn't do any damage.
Right.
So then you end up staying sometimes in relationships where you're constantly trying to fix something between you and the other person that wasn't yours to be fixed. And now it's actually kind of creating an unhealthy dynamic.
I'm so glad you brought up the topic of rupture and repair, because I think that is in like 90% of situations, like the answer, like the solution when you're talking about how do I help my children be healthy adults when we're going through something as painful as their parents not getting along right now, not knowing if we're going to reconcile, maybe trying to reconcile, maybe considering divorce, whatever the situation is. And there's so much pressure on the parents to go, I want to make sure that my child is healthy. I want to make sure that they grow up to be a healthy adult. We cannot protect them from the reality that there are bad things in the world, and we cannot protect them from the fact that there will be rupture in their life and that there is currently rupture in our life. But what we can do is teach them repair. And repair, when you think about the sentence that we always hear, oh, kids are so resilient. Like, well, they are. Like, humans are resilient, but that can be used, kind of going back to your story earlier, in a way where that means, oh, I don't have to talk to them. I don't have to explain anything to them. They're just going to live through this and then they'll be fine, right? That's not what we recommend.
Also,
what if we take the idea of humans are resilient when we repair the relationship? We can navigate a lot of things when we make mistakes, when we have big feelings, when we feel angry, when we feel sad, when we feel hurt, when something doesn't happen according to what we had visualized happening. when we are safe enough in that relationship to have the conversations, share how we feel, what we need, have that safety need met, and repair, and that's going to set up kids, because then they can go and take that with their spouses and with their kids and teach that totally different language to them.
Not to scare anybody, but I love that you just brought up that catch-all phrase, like kids are so resilient, because that gets thrown around a lot more than it's like actually applicable. So that's like another topic that was brought up. I don't remember where I was reading about it or learning about it, but one of the, trauma work that I do, and I'm not going to say this to like scare parents out there that might be listening, but kids are not, they seem resilient and they appear resilient, but oftentimes it's nervous system, biological, survival, fight or flight reactions that are happening. And it's like coping mechanisms. And it's not necessarily happening on a conscious level. It's happening on a subconscious level. And if kids are as resilient as society would like us to believe that they are, there wouldn't be so many of us as adults doing the deep work in therapy. So like, not to say that you can't be like healthy and in therapy, but it's like, that term is thrown around a lot and it's not actually super accurate.
Yeah, maybe a better word would be kids adapt to the life that they are in extraordinarily well. And I see this with a lot of my adult women clients who have been betrayed.
Biological survival.
Exactly. And that's what I end up seeing a lot with my clients is they'll be talking about a certain pattern that they had. Like one of the most common that we can just talk about real briefly is people pleasing. And that very often comes from childhood, and you can it makes so much sense because you have like an 8-year-old that was raised maybe in a house of you are seen and not heard, and you're not allowed to have big emotions. And if you're angry, I'm going to shut that down. If you're sad, you're not allowed to, you know what I mean? Like I'm not going to validate that emotion. Like you need to be stoic or whatever the environment was in the home. Or you have a parent that maybe is emotionally volatile. And so then that child, you can't go anywhere. You can't provide for yourself. So your brain has to come up with a survival mechanism that says, how can I manage this parent or this rule or this environment or whatever? And your brain is brilliant. So it does things like make a people-pleasing pattern where I'm just going to manage everybody else's emotions so that my environment is safe. But then as an adult, when we do have safety in our environment because we've created a safe life, we still find ourselves falling in that pattern. That's when we have that opportunity to do the reflection and the healing and the undoing of that. But I do think it's I'm so glad you brought that up because I do think that's a really important reframe for people is this isn't a weakness for you. This is actually like an incredible thing that your brain has done to protect you. It just is no longer maybe needed now to protect you anymore.
I love that. Like when it's no longer needed, right? Like once you sort of start becoming aware of the fact that you're having these patterns or you're starting to feel uncomfortable about it, or you're like, hey, I kind of notice I'm always the one who's having to like do X, Y, and Z. That's where you're at that point now where, okay, hey, you actually have enough tools and resources at this moment in time where that part of you that was protecting you from other stuff like underneath that created that pattern, like you actually are ready now to kind of pivot and like look at that and figure out like what was that doing for me and like how would I like to proceed further. And then also it's when you think about what are the qualities and traits that we as kids would get praised on, it was the coping mechanism. So not only are we developing survival strategies, but now that becomes our personality because, oh, she's so flexible, like, oh, she's so easygoing, oh, like look at her like getting straight A's, or like I think it's the perfectionist that I became like a perfectionist probably somewhere between college and graduate school. If you think about the timing, and then I unfortunately had a bunch of stuff happen all at the same time within like a 2 to 3 year time period. And it was my parents' divorce was one of those things. But like, I was not as a kid. I mean, I was particular, but I would not say that I was a perfectionist. But I became like very, very, I like things a certain way and I'm very studious, and that's what gets praised. Like I was so proud, like I'm still proud, like I still cling to my like perfectionist. I'm so proud of myself when I'm like in that role. And it's like not necessarily like the healthiest thing, but like part of healing too is like getting now it's not coming from a nervous system place. It's coming from like a choice place and the lifestyle and like you kind of get to separate out, like, it doesn't cause anxiety anymore, and I'm not doing it to please other people anymore. It just makes my, so things like that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think awareness is the first step, right? And that's why we go to therapy, or we go to coaching, or, we do all this work is, hey, I'm having these patterns in my life that I don't really like, or I'm feeling unsatisfied with my relationships, or the depth to which they go, or I'm going through betrayal, or I'm going through this. And then we have somebody to kind of talk through it. And then we find that we have these patterns, and being aware of it is like, that alone sometimes is enough for us to begin to identify when we're doing it and then change the pattern. And then other times we have to do some of the deeper work that you and I have engaged in and that we talk about a lot with the brain exercises and subconscious work and those sorts of things. And it's all an opportunity. But I do think it's important to always reframe, right? That it's not a shame-based thing. It is your brain did the best it could with the tools and resources in the environment. And just thinking, when we're thinking about that with our children, understanding that they have limited resources in an 8-year-old brain and a 12-year-old brain and a 15-year-old brain, which again, kind of always brings it back to how can we relate to them in as healthy a way as we possibly can. And part of that, I think, I really deeply believe, is just really opening up the conversations constantly around emotions and around what they're experiencing, and making sure they always feel safe to ask questions about anything, that you are there to be the person that is able to answer those questions for them and to support them through whatever it is that they're navigating any day. And we're never going to be perfect doing it. But bringing, the repair aspect back in, I think that I really do believe that makes a huge, huge difference when we can say, I'm sorry and I love you.
Yeah. And it's also okay to not have the answers, right? Like, you don't have to make up an answer for your child if you really don't know. And I think that also models honesty, right? Like, hey, bud, like, that's a really good question. I don't actually know. I don't have an answer for that, but that's been on my mind too. Or like, that's something that's been worrying me as well. Like, maybe we can find somebody else who can like help us navigate that. And something you just said just had me quickly thinking about how, like little kids don't have the tools and the resources, and majority of the time, the tools and the resources that they're going to have are the ones that their parents have. So I get asked quite a lot. Like, I have a lot of, parent clients who are parents, or even when I was teaching and the parents were like, what can I do for my child? What resources for my child? What for my child? And 9 times out of 10, my answer is like, well, what are you doing for yourself? Like, what are you doing to navigate? Like, having the tools and the resources and doing the work for yourself, like, helps regulate you as a parent, helps get you to like a more resilient and resourceful place. And that then expands out across the whole family. Now, I'm not saying like both of you can't be like in a setup to both, but it's like, it has to start from the top down, because the whole family dynamic is being mirrored off of the parents and what the parents are bringing into the household.
Yep. Yeah. And so I think that just goes back to the idea of like, regardless of whether it's staying together or separating, kind of analyzing what is the pathway that's going to allow me to model the best level of healing that I can achieve at this time. And that's going to hopefully be the healthiest thing that we can do. And again, the kids are, humans are so resilient in like throughout life when connection and safety and repair is available to them. And we can recover from so many things when those things are present, I think. And when there is honesty and authenticity in the relationship, I think that makes a huge difference. So a couple things that just really quickly, I'm going to say that we sort of mentioned this throughout the podcast, but just some things to think about, right? Bringing children into the decision-making, you sort of mentioned that. So I think that goes right along with having a lot of these conversations, learning how they're feeling, learning how they're thinking about things. And of course, there's age-appropriate boundaries, right? Like a 4-year-old isn't going to make your decisions for you as an adult, but, just bringing them into the conversation. Maybe having a therapist for the kids. And this goes whether you guys are thinking about reconciling, but there's you're navigating something hard in the home, or if you're considering divorce and you want to have somebody kind of help you create a conversation around that in a safe way, and then maybe even having them talk to a children therapist or a family therapist on their own, so they have an outlet outside of you to kind of process through what they're thinking and feeling. And again, just keeping the conversations open all the time. And of course, there's age appropriate information, but I do think being as honest as you can about what is happening with, and that's going to be different depending on if kids are 5 or if they're 8 or if they're 18, like what level of information they have about what you and your spouse are navigating. But always within age appropriate, but always being honest. I think that's really important, that we're honest about what's happening. Even if that's as simple as saying, hey, we're not getting along right now. We're going through some really, really hard times. We love you very much. You can ask me any questions you have any time of the day. And, ever. And I will always be here to talk to you about it, whatever that is. And then if you're struggling through that, really talking to someone that can maybe a family therapist or somebody that can help you sort of navigate these dynamics in a way that maybe brings up some conversations that you wouldn't think about having, or some support for your kids that you wouldn't think about on your own. I'm certainly not the, end all expert with any of that. We're just sort of sharing some of our perspectives from a broad healing perspective, but also from some of our personal experiences. Anything else that you would want to share in terms of this whole topic?
Just circle back to I'm going to just circle back to the staying together for the kids. If you hear yourself saying that statement, I think it's a great awareness point to recognize that that is not the only reason that you're choosing to stay together, that's like kind of, this is going to sound shaming, but it's not meant to. It's just the best language choice that I can think of to get the point across, is like, it's sort of a cop out to be like, oh, we're doing this for the kids. And then again, I think I said this earlier, but just in case I didn't, that's also putting way too much on the child. So just if you notice yourself saying that, or you've said it in the past, just take that as a pause point, that there's something here for you to kind of like dig into a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think some of the perspectives that you brought up in terms of like how children can interpret it are really important, because they are angles and perspectives that maybe we didn't naturally think about. And that I think is one of them, that staying together, sometimes a child can even say, oh, that's a lot of pressure on me. I don't think that's maybe an angle that I would regularly think about as well.
Yeah. And I mean, the relationship, I know it's a family dynamic, but like a husband and wife really started between those two people. And so at the end of the day, the purpose of being in that relationship is for you two. And yes, the family dynamic, but you kind of want to separate that out in some ways when you're looking at the conflict, and what is it between the two of you that you're staying in it for, because that's what should be getting centered in the conversations, or not centered if you're realizing there's nothing.
Yeah,
then right. That gives you a lot of information as well.
Right. Always having that idea too of like what's going to end up being the healthiest for the individual.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story and your thoughts and your perspectives. I really appreciate having you on today, Carly. It's always so fun to hang out with you.
Thank you for having me.
Every day is a new opportunity to choose health and freedom. Make that choice today, and we will see you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.